Welcome to Lesson 12, Configuring Routing on a Cisco Router. Sublesson 12.1, Examining Router Bootup and Post. While it's very exciting to watch a router reboot and start up for the first time, what we're going to do instead with this lesson is we're going to get some hands-on time with a Nexus 7000 switch. So let's go ahead and dive into that switch. This is my Nexus 7000 switch. It looks very similar to the Nexus 5000 switches we've been working on up until this point. If I do a show version on this switch, I can see that it has some slightly different information on it. Obviously, the software versions are different, as well as the hardware versions are different. If you'll notice, this says Cisco Nexus 7000. It's a 9-slot chassis with a supervisor module 2. In this case, we're running NXOS 6.2.2. You can also see that a Nexus operating system actually consists of two different images. One of them is a Kickstart image, or a Bootstrap image, and the other one is the system image file. In this case, I have to specify both of those images to be able to boot my Nexus 7000 appropriately. Same thing with the Nexus 5000. If I want to take a look at how my Nexus 7000 is equipped, I will go ahead and do a show module, or a show mod for short. This show module shows me that I have two supervisors installed, which is a great thing because I'm highly available and redundant. The second thing it shows me is that I have quite a few line cards plugged in. I have both M1 modules and F1 modules. Now, going through exactly what M1 modules and F1 modules are is a little bit outside the scope of this lesson, but I encourage you to do some research on the Cisco website. So let's take a look at the rest of the show module. So we can see here we've got quite a few modules installed. We've got the software versions and the hardware versions for each one of those modules, as well as different addressing information and things like that. So it looks quite a bit different from what we've seen in the past on the Nexus 5000 switch. The next thing I want to do is just quickly run through the setup on the Nexus 7000 because it's a little bit different than what we saw on the Nexus 5000. So I'm going to go ahead and type setup, and it's going to ask me again if I would like to enter the basic configuration dialog. I'm going to say yes. In this case, it comes right out and says, do you want to enforce the secure password standard? In a normal data center environment, of course, this would be yes. But this is not normal. This is lab equipment, so I'm going to go ahead and say no. In this case, the switch can see that I already have my administrator user ID configured, so it's asking me if I'd like to create another login account. I'm going to say no. The next step looks very similar to what we saw on the Nexus 5500. It's asking me if I want to set my SNMP community strings, and my answer is going to be no. I can once again enter a switch name and then configure my out-of-band management. This out-of-band management is my management 0 interface. Now on a Nexus 7000, it's a little bit different than on a Nexus 5000. In this case, if we're taking advantage of a feature called VDCs, or virtual device contexts, we need to make sure that we set our management 0 port for all of our VDCs on the same subnet. We're not going to get into what those are or why that is because it's outside of the scope of this lesson, but I just wanted to let you know that. So continuing on, my management IP is already set, and we've already configured this on the Nexus 5500, so I'm going to go ahead and skip that as well. Now here's where it gets a little bit different. It's asking me if I want to configure advanced IP options. I'm going to say yes. I now have the chance to configure a static route. If I answer yes here, I can configure my first static route by entering the destination prefix, which in this case I'm going to configure a default route 0.0.0.0. It's then going to ask me for my prefix mask. In this case, it's again 0.0.0.0. I then configure the next hop gateway I would like to have for my default route. In this case, I'm going to configure the following address. I then have the capability to configure a DNS IP4 address, which I do not want to do, and a default domain name, which I do not want to do. It now goes back to the same configuration we've seen previously, where I can enable Telnet service, which I do not want to do because it's not secure, and SSH is secure by default, is turned on the Nexus platform. I'm going to pick all my defaults in this scenario. Here's another unique difference between the Nexus 5548 and the Nexus 7000. Because I have the ability to plug in different line cards in the Nexus 7000, I may have line cards that can do layer 2 and some line cards that can do both layer 3 and layer 2. So I get to pick what type of default interface I would like to have. In this case, I'm going to pick a layer 3 interface because I'm going to use this device as a router. I can also pick what the default interface state is for my switch port. If you remember, on the 5548, the default interface state was actually no shut or enabled. On the Nexus 7000, it's usually shut. That's why it's always a good idea to go through your switch ports after you configured them and put in no shut, just so you don't get confused what platform you're on and forget to enable a port. It's now asking me if I'd like to edit my configuration, which I do not want to do, and then it's asking me if I'd like to apply it. And I do not want to do that in this case. Now, just as a quick reminder, please remember that the Nexus operating system turns on different functionality or features with the feature command. In our next lessons, we're going to be configuring routing and routing protocols. So you're going to start seeing me use the feature command to turn on that functionality, because most functionality is turned off by default. Please join me for implementing a basic router configuration.